Welcome to another Frontend Coffee Break. This is episode 35. Yeah, it's been a while. We're back. My name is Ricardo Torres. With me, as usual, Chucho Castañeda. How are you, sir?
Hello. Well, today I'm very relaxed. It's right now almost the weekend is almost upon us, and I'm looking forward to it. Doing a little bit of moving around inside my house, moving things around. So I always like to do that too. I like to I like to refactor my house arrangements.
Whoa, that's very engineering mindset.
Yes.
Definitely things we look forward when you join Cognizant Centric. So yes, we are from Cognizant Centric. This YouTube channel or whatever you're listening to. If you're listening, go to YouTube. See our faces. We're more handsome in a face-to-face. All right. So yes, as you saw, the topic for today is patterns, anti-patterns, and dark patterns.
Patterns everywhere.
Before we start, give us some context, Chucho, about this.
Of course. I mean, as a developer, one thing, eventually when you're around many years, there's a point in your life, and even if you describe what you're doing to people, there's a point where you get to say, well, I'm doing this. And then you've realized that you've done this before, the year before, and the year before that, and the year before that. And then suddenly you feel that you're doing the same thing over and over again. You're repeating the same pattern over and over again. You're doing the same types of solutions. And the thing is that the work that you do, although you're building different things, you use the same building blocks, just as in architecture, they're going to use bricks for one type of building. They're going to use concrete for other types of building, wood for another type. They do the same thing over and over again, but they use the best tools depending on what they're doing. They follow best practices, they follow certain patterns. And that's what we're going to be talking about in programming. There's good ways to do it, and there's not so good ways of doing stuff. And that's what we are going to discuss here today.
Awesome. I think, the topic is super broad. So we will try to focus on, of course, our main areas, JavaScript, HTML, CSS, and follow on that. So if you're a backend developer, you're free to stay, but we will not be talking about Java patterns, C++ patterns, just what we know best.
A lot of them are overlap, in the end. The idea of pattern is the general idea is that in the context of software development itself, a pattern refers to a usable solution to common problems or tasks when programming. It's a solution, a proven solution that works to recurring different types of issues. Like, for example, when you need for two objects or two elements to communicate with each other, there is a proven solution to program something using a certain pattern to communicate these elements. And you can do it different way, but ideally, if you use that communication pattern, that will be the best optimal way.
Yeah, it makes sense. In the end, the industry or the community in general, development community in general, at least for front-end, if somebody has already developed something that works, that is performant, that as you said, it's proven to work in many scenarios.
Exactly.
Just don't reinvent the wheel. Don't spend time trying to come up with a new way of doing stuff when you have it that already available to you, right? So I think that's, in what phase do you think it's most important to think about patterns? Is it something that you only think about at the beginning on a greenfield project and you think about architecture, or is it something that you constantly are investigating, reading up on?
I think it's when you have a little bit of experience, you think less about that you're using a pattern because you're doing things naturally. They become part of the way you work, and you don't think about patterns. But in the end, you use patterns or you implement things using patterns throughout from the beginning to the end, because sometimes you're facing new issues that you hadn't faced before. So that's when you might be implementing the new solution. Of course, when you're doing maintenance, maybe there's a little bit less of implementing new patterns. But then again, you could be refactoring the application, trying to implement good patterns, best practices, and such.
True. Okay, so if patterns are things that, word of an engineer, very scalable and very maintainable and very efficient,
Exactly.
What would an anti-pattern be?
It's precisely the opposite. It's funny enough, you call an anti-pattern any solution or approach that seems to be like a good idea at first, and that's the funny thing about anti-patterns. They look like they're a good idea, but end up creating more problems than they actually solve. And the funny thing is that I remember early in my career, 18 years ago, that we were, remember that I had this very senior developer looking at the code and saying, what you're doing here, this is not the correct way of doing it. And I was like, what do you mean? Look at this beautiful code that is really well structured. And they explained, well, the issue with this is it's not scalable. It's only going to work for this. And we need a little bit more, blah, blah, blah. And then that's when I got introduced or reintroduced into patterns. I had seen it while I was doing in college, but I didn't really use it until at this point when they told me, well, no, this is an anti-pattern. And we had a small workshop of patterns and anti-pattern. So an anti-pattern is, in the end, something that looks like a good solution, but it's really not.
Yeah, I feel like maybe anti-patterns are something that maybe a junior developer might stumble across, of course, unintentionally. Like you think, okay, you see something online, maybe you copy and paste from a Stack Overflow and you start coding and you do, cowboy style, you just do stuff. And at the end, what? This looks awful. This looks, it needs to go to the garbage bin a few years or a few months later. So yeah, definitely you fell into an anti-pattern. Yeah. Any good resources when it comes to design patterns?
Well, when we were discussing this earlier, you shared one of the best resources that I've seen, especially as a front-end developer. I loved it. I started looking at it and I went through it, and it's called patterns.dev. I don't know who's the person responsible for this website. Let's see.
It's multiple authors. One of them is Adios Mani, that guru from Google.
Mm.
And
nice.
Well, this is a fantastic resource. Of course, this will link. We're going to share this link as well. But I was going through the patterns right now. I'm looking at them. We have JavaScript patterns, just general JavaScript. We have React patterns, Vue patterns, and well, those are the ones that at least I quickly look here. And I went through some of the patterns, and it was super nice, interesting resource. They have, for example, one pattern that it's a very typical thing that you use. This is one of the first that I remember using, which is the singleton pattern. It's something that when you want only one object and you really just want one instance of that object, because, for example, you need to share a state throughout the different. I mean, that's what the single pattern is there for. And this was one of the first one that I saw. You have it here. You have it explained. You have it. I love this resource because it has pieces of code that explain everything. I mean, I guess that you shared that you've taken a look through it, right?
I have. Yeah. I mean, I know it's there. I don't go that many often there. It began as just only JavaScript, and now there are more things. I see that CSS and other solutions in there. But definitely have a look, and especially if you're starting a new project from scratch, and yeah, it makes sense. But I wanted to go with my question is like,
yes.
Tell the listeners what is or what are or what does it mean if I say gang of four?
Okay, so this is something that might have a different at the first moment it might have a very different meaning, but
no.
Patterns, the term patterns, or when the first time that the community started talking about development patterns was back in, let me look at the notes, in 1994, when four developers, Eric, I hope that I get the names correctly, Eric Gama, Richard Helm, Ralph Johnson, and John Blisides, hope that I pronounce it correctly, which these four developers are known as the Gang of Four. They got together and they created a book. Let me see what the name, Design Patterns, Gang of Four. No, let me see the kind of, I'm looking. Okay, Design Patterns, Elements of Reusable Object-Oriented Software. So they sat down, they looked at the best practices that they had developed throughout the years, and they classified them, and they gave them names, and they gave the how do you say this? The situations in which you would be using these patterns, and they basically just coined or started using the name. That's when we begin hearing about patterns.
So basically documenting what people were already doing, right? So the way of object-oriented JavaScript or whatever it was back in the days, and then just documenting what people were using. That again was proven to be efficient, maintainable, scalable, and thus being patterns. Makes perfect sense. We'll link it in the description so you guys can check it out. But definitely,
I would really recommend this. I mean, if you're starting in development, you don't worry about it. Don't worry if you don't understand everything. It will eventually make sense. And if you're more of a seasoned developer and have never thought about patterns because you don't need them, maybe you're doing them already without knowing, I would still really recommend would be a starting point. Before reading the patterns.dev, which is very nice, I would really recommend to go to the link site to find a little bit more about the Gang of Four. You will probably find summaries about it and go through it and see what patterns they're describing, what the use cases are. I think several years ago when I looked at it the last time, they had code, but I don't remember if it was C++ code or whatever, but it is readable in any case. But you can go through it, you can learn a lot of things, but it's not about memorizing. I mean, do you remember by memory, if I tell you one pattern that you know that you've been implementing, do you remember by memory how to implement
by memory,
it?
all the use cases, all the traps or the ways of, no. I mean, of course I know the thing is, what you said before, you read it and then when the thing comes up, back of your mind, you say, singleton, factory, module. You hear this word and then you can go back and say, okay, I read this before, so let me just Google it and quickly gain the knowledge again. And you said something very interesting I want to point out. You said that you might be using patterns and you don't know, right? So It's very interesting right? So I wanted to ask more about nowadays we have Angular developers, React developers, and these people, they're fine people, they're developers, and they are probably, for sure, using patterns without knowing. And my question is, if you focus your development using just frameworks, like whatever framework it is, Vue, Svelte, React, whatever it's for your flavor, do you think that then the patterns in JavaScript do not have as much importance? Is it equally important, or because you just follow what React says you do, doesn't matter? Thoughts?
Well, I think that when you find something that is well done, whether it's a library, whether it's a framework, and it's well done, most likely it is built using patterns. Some of these frameworks, in the end, what we said before, we as developers find the same issues over and over again. We try to fix them over and over again. We try to create solutions for similar problems. In the end, the frameworks are this. They are a way of working that try to solve similar issues. So yes, I mean, they have to be built on patterns. Some of the ways you might inadvertently be using patterns and you don't know the name, but you're saying, React says that in order to maintain a state, it has to be done like this. And probably that's a pattern. Or React says that in order to communicate, you have to do this. And most likely it's implemented through a pattern, a messaging pattern or something like this. So all of these frameworks, I think that if they're good, they have to be based on patterns.
Yeah, for sure. I think maybe the only downside is that you might not have an easy way or an easy job if you want to change the pattern somehow. Maybe it's not as easy. I mean, if you want to break how Angular communicates, or as you said before, okay, React maybe Redux for state management or whatever. So moving away from that, maybe finding another pattern not as easy as you have a vanilla project where you see, we've seen that for us, whatever, the singleton doesn't work anymore. Let's move to modules or whatever it is. So yeah, fun stuff. Anything else from patterns, Chucho?
Well, I just wanted to point out a little bit about the summary about the Gang of Four. If you go and read it, you'll find out that they separated patterns in three categories: creational patterns, the structural patterns, and the behavioral patterns. In the end, that's the way that the things that we do in code, which is the creational patterns, which basically say what is the best way to create things depending on your needs. The structural patterns, which talk about how you need to structure the project, structure the code in order to work best depending on the needs. And the behavioral patterns is how you need to, once again, create the code, structure the code so that it follows best practices when you need to manage the behavioral of the patterns. That would be like the summary. There's a fantastic list, as I said. Let me take a look at some of the lists, just to mention some of the few. Maybe you've heard it somewhere, but I mean, our listeners have heard it. There's the factory method pattern, the abstract factory, the singleton, prototype builder, object pool, adapter, composite, decorator, facade, proxy, iterator, mediator, observer, state. I mean, the observer pattern, which is something that, if I'm not mistaken, the intersection observer and such follow this pattern. So you probably are already using this state pattern, blah, 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 blah. So it is really, I cannot stress it enough. You don't need to memorize it. You don't need to know it by heart, but you at least, I think that every developer needs to at least read it once. You don't need to go deep. Just know that they exist, know the names, read it once, and I'm sure that eventually you'll be happy to say, this can be solved this way.
So you have it. Leave a comment if you've read it, or leave a comment if you haven't. All right, let's move to anti-patterns. I don't know how to pronounce anti-patterns in Spanish. Anti-patterns in English. Never mind.
I would say so, yeah.
Should we start with most juicy, maybe JavaScript?
Okay, so for example, as we mentioned, anti-patterns is ways to do things that might seem to be correct way, but in the end, they create more problems. They make less maintainable code. They make code that it's not scalable, not reusable. And in the end, these are things that you actually want to get. What anti-patterns, for example, could you tell us about that you've seen?
One that I see almost always when we do interviews, and it's like, man, really? It's two actually. It's two, and it's quite connected, but it's two that I see every time. And I'm like, 2024, and I'm still doing these things. One is, how in JavaScript it's very expensive to manipulate the DOM, right? Changing things in DOM are quote unquote expensive. You don't have a MacBook, it's very fast, but usually it's expensive. So when you're looping through whatever, lists, JSONs, arrays, whatever it is, you're looping and then you're manipulating the DOM inside the loop. That's usually like a red flag. When I go to a pull request and see these things, I'm like, no. You cannot do that. And it's very easy to just move away the DOM manipulation outside of the loop, doing different things, and then you speed up a lot. And the second one is not using event delegation. Like when you do loops or whatever, and you add an event to every single element on the page, which is also something that maybe frameworks might do because you just add on-click events everywhere. But I don't know internally if they do event delegation. That's for the frameworks to answer. But again, if you're doing vanilla, and leverage event delegation, right? If you have a bunch of elements on the page, just add one event and then just check for class name, for element, or whatever it is. And usually the code looks way simpler. It's way more performant. So yeah, those two are my go-to. What about you, Chucho?
And it's amazing what you mentioned. I do have a few that I can mention that I've seen. But it's fantastic that this is a perfect example, because you would say, oh, this is okay. I'm going to do it this way. I'm creating an element. Of course, every time that I do it, I manipulate the DOM for each one of the elements. And it makes sense. It's like, maybe for 5 elements, it's going to be okay, but it's not. This is a fantastic example of it's not scalable. Maybe you need to manipulate 100 elements for whatever reason. I've been in projects that you need to manipulate like almost 1,000 elements on the screen. And maybe you need to manipulate these elements, and this would be, it won't scale well. It will suddenly, the more that you need to manipulate, the worse.
Yeah, for sure. We were just adding, right? I mean, you have to add the list with JavaScript from an API. I mean, would you rather add like 200 elements one by one, or to just do one append and you add the 20 elements, just to do it once, right? And then the browser will thank you, and the CPU as well.
Yes. So, I love that this was a very nice example of non-scalable thing. Anyhow, one anti-pattern that I think we all fall into at the beginning is the spaghetti code, which is something that is universal. Java, JavaScript, or whatever language that you're working with. The spaghetti code, which basically is that you put everything in one place, and it's just a lot of code there, just like bunch of spaghetti just all entangled between each other, and everything in one same file. And this is something that years ago you had to be very careful. You didn't have as much tools as we currently have to organize the code, to make sure that everything builds nicely. Before, I remember you need to load the different libraries or files in a certain order just to make sure that everything is there. But nowadays, I think with modules and other things, you can avoid this anti-pattern. So if you suddenly, I wouldn't put a total number in this, but if you see a JavaScript file that has definitely 1,000 lines, maybe it shouldn't have 1,000 lines.
Too much. I think in our project we have set ESLint to prevent committing files more than 300 lines.
Nice.
Yeah.
I mean, this is very interesting because this is ESLint is definitely a tool that you can use to avoid some of the common pitfalls, some of the common anti-patterns, and this could be one. I mean, and you might say, hey, maybe I need a file that has more than 300 lines. I mean,
no,
maybe you do
split it.
Exactly. Maybe there's better way to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be...
Usually these things are like, maybe because people are not using pure functions, it's usually everything is connected and all the functions are dependent to each other with a bunch of side effects. It's messy. As soon as you start doing like pure functions and doing util functions where you just call an import, just using imports, man. We didn't have imports back in our days. Now it's native. Just use imports and exports and life is easier.
And one thing that I love is, once again, one of the issues of using anti-patterns, it makes it non-scalable, but it also makes it less maintainable. If you're having to do modification in a code and you go, damn, how the heck do I change this? Or you're complaining about how complex it is to change something, most likely there's an issue with the code. The issue is not well done. You can do it in a better way. You can follow a pattern of modularization, a pattern of separation of concerns. I mean, you most likely will be able to change this code, and most likely the code has and it follows or has an anti-pattern. So this would be a good way to think, hey, maybe I should change things. Is when you're trying to maintain it and you see that it's hard, that would be it. Another anti-pattern that I hate and I see it and it's like, no, don't do this, is when people leave code that it's not really necessary and they still leave it inside just in case we might need it. They leave just a little bit of code there. They don't change it. They don't remove it. No, they leave it just in case I'm going to use it. It's like, no,
just stash it. Stash it. Export a patch. You can do many things in Git. Just why would you commit things that are not being used? Even if it's commented out, it just makes no sense.
And then we have these are, for example, specifically coding patterns, the way that we use code to do things. But there's also patterns that are related to behavior, like for example, disabling the mouse clicks or keyboard events. I mean, what's your take into this?
Don't do that. I mean, I hate it. I mean, when you go to a website and suddenly you want to right click because open a new tab or highlight a word, and they say no copy and pasting, no stealing. Are you kidding me? Come on. Then I open the DevTools and I just hack everything. But it's like, come on, don't do that. Don't. In general, don't change like default browser behavior, like scroll bars, like mouse clicks, things like that, unless it's absolutely necessary because you're doing a game or a super complex. I don't know. Usually there's just a few valid reasons to do these things. So generally, if the client asks you to do it, say no. Say that it's not like cross-platform and perform and blah blah blah. And avoid it, because it comes back to you. All these things that we're talking about here, all these anti-patterns and all these things, they come back to you like in 6 months or whatever it is. You're doing it. You said before, you're doing a change. Oh man, how am I going to maintain this now? Like I have a defect. How do I find the piece that's not working? It's not like the code is so complicated. It's not unit tested. So definitely follow patterns. All right, we should speed up a little bit here, Chucho. Okay, what else?
I'd just like to point out before we go precisely, we were talking about behavior right now. And I mean, you can follow anti-patterns as well as patterns when you're talking about how the user interface. But before we go, and this would be a perfect bridge to dark patterns. But before we do this, we have been talking about JavaScript related patterns, but this also extends to other things, HTML and CSS.
Yes, you're right.
Just to mention a few CSS anti-patterns, it would be like declaring styles globally. You know that you have the div, a paragraph or whatever, and you put some styles there, because then you would most likely need to modify them or override them somewhere else. To add inline styles in the wrong way, because I mean, it is valid to use inline styles, but sometimes you're putting it there just, well, I'll change it later. No, do not do that. There's a use case where it's valid, but it's not always valid. Duplicating CSS code over and over. I mean, part of the nice thing about CSS is you have classes. You can use the classes like Tailwind uses this, does it nicely. And there's not only JavaScript, that's what I just wanted to highlight. There's not only JavaScript and patterns and anti-patterns, there's also CSS and HTML patterns and anti-patterns. So it's worth looking. CSS patterns, best practices, CSS anti-patterns, so you learn a little bit more.
We cannot skip CSS without talking about naming conventions and patterns. Mention about BEM. I know BEM is one thing you love, so tell me about BEM and how can it be misused?
Well, BEM, for example, it's something that should help reduce, make the code more maintainable and reduce solutions. It's a pattern that it tells you how to name your elements to facilitate styling. But just like many other things, it can be misused. Like, for example, the idea is you have block, element, and modifier, and usually you separate the block from the element with an underscore. And sometimes you see people saying, well, this is a block, the accordion block, this is my element, the body element, and this is a sub-element, the
title, I don't know,
the title or the text or the content, I don't know. And then you do an underscore, and then, oh, well, this is the content's title, so it's an underscore, and then you put the title, but this is the whatever, and you start just doing these huge names. No, it's supposed to be simple. So and that's the beauty, and that's the dangers of anti-patterns. They look that it's okay. I'm following a convention. Even if you're thinking that you're following conventions, you can do it wrong. So you have to be careful about this. You need to understand when is the correct way to do this and when it is not.
Absolutely. Yeah. Oof. Damn. Good stuff.
So let's move to the dark patterns. Ricard, tell us a little bit about.
It's like a game, dark pattern. I love the naming, dark patterns, dark souls, dark something. In general, when I think of dark patterns, as you said here in our notes, it's deceptive patterns. It's not something that you do accidentally. There's no way. So it's something that the developer, product owner, or client has asked specifically to code this way. And usually it's to deceive people, to deceive the users, right? To do certain actions or to sell certain things, to get more conversion rates, whatever it is, but it's usually to trick the users. And then me as a developer, when I'm asked to do these things, I'm like, really? I mean, if you ask me, like, I will challenge it. But then, okay, if you say to me, yes, goes, I'm like, okay, we do it. But it's unethical and it's amoral. But first, resources. You like resources? Give me a resource of dark patterns.
The nice thing, well, just to clarify to the listeners, we were talking about development patterns, and right now we're still going to talk about patterns, but it's more of interaction patterns.
UX. Sure.
Yes. So there's a fantastic website, which is darkpatterns.org. It was created by Harry Brignall, who coined actually the term deceptive patterns or dark patterns in July 28th of 2010. So we've been here with that for 14 years already. So that is a fantastic resource. It's fun. It's fun.
And you can see it's super extensive, right? It's so comprehensive. Yeah.
Yes. And the funny thing is you can see how people are able. Okay, so tell us a little bit about some of the dark patterns that you know.
Some of that trigger me the most.
Yes, I love this. That trigger you the most. And I'm sure that the listeners are going to relate to some of them.
Let's see. Okay, the newsletter thing. I hate it. Forms, right? You get this newsletter thing, and usually people like do it correctly, which, okay, check here if you want to sign up for the newsletter. But I've seen, and you probably seen as well, checkboxes that are checked by default, which is super annoying. Don't check this thing by default, right? Because they want to convert more users to the newsletter. Or uncheck if you want to be like the negative. So it usually is check if you want to subscribe, or check if you want to unsubscribe. That's a dark pattern, right? It's tricking you because you're used to check to subscribe, but check to unsubscribe. Oh, come on.
Yeah, and this is the funny thing, and all of the dark patterns are based on this. It's like, what is the best way to actually make the users' lives better? Okay, now that we know it, do the opposite.
Totally. What else? Things like hiding information from the user, like information that you want to see, hide it on a third level menu, or just say, oh, you have to download the app to do certain actions where you actually can do it in the website. You could do it in the website, but they don't want to do it because, again, they want prevent using it. One real example, BBVA, even if it's our client, not what we do the front website, but the internal application they removed a way of like paying your mortgage early, right? You can go to your mortgage and see all the pending payments. And before that, on the website, you could just click a single button and it would take you to, pay the mortgage early. Now it's gone. And when I asked customer support, they said, you can only do that from the application, the mobile app, hidden through, again, 3 menu levels. And I'm like, are you kidding me? That's a dark pattern. Like you of course, you don't want me to pay this thing early because then you get less fees from me. But hiding it's clearly a way of saying, we don't want you to do that. Don't do that.
This reminds me of when I was playing. There's this fantastic, and this is sarcasm, developer that wants you to be online when you play their games, even if they're not online, like zero online interaction. They want you to connect. I had the Xbox, and I remember that it's like, log in. It's like, no, I'm just playing this. I don't need to log in. No, log in. And I was like desperate because it's like, I do not want to log in. And eventually I found out that if you move the joystick down, the window would scroll, and then you would see continue without logging in. And it was like hidden because, for example, a pattern, a good pattern is when you want to tell the user that there's more information in a box, you put a scroll bar.
Yeah. Or an arrow or something. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And they removed the scroll bar on purpose so that you wouldn't even think, and the element, the text and the button fit perfectly in the box. So it actually looked like that was all the information that you had. But they still had the opt-out option, but you needed to move that.
Find it by luck. Yes. By luck. Yeah.
And that's another terrible anti-pattern.
Scumbags.
Cool. What else would you?
What else? Again, copy text that shames you. Like, you've encountered this when you try to, they offer you something like a modal, there's an offer, a sign up, and then there's the call to action button that says, yes, sign me up, whatever. But the cancel button usually is, you don't want to save money, or you will not receive any great offers.
I love this. Yes.
Are you sure you don't want to be happy? And like, are you kidding me?
This.
Are you kidding me?
Are you sure you don't want to be happy?
It's like, really, man, content editors, like, I mean, you should be ashamed of yourselves. Like, just add the yes, I want to sign up, and no later. No, comma later, or no, not at this time, but not trying to shame me and forcing me psychologically to say, okay, I don't want to be a loser, so I might as well accept the offer, which again probably tricks you in a different way, right? So, yeah.
And I love this, that now that we're mentioning some of these patterns or dark patterns, if you go to the dark patterns.org, which right now I think it's deceptive.design, you will see the types of deceptive patterns, and one of them is the one that you just described has a name, and the name is confirm shaming.
Confirm shaming, yeah, makes perfect sense. Yeah.
I love it.
Come on. Last one, and I'm not afraid to say names. Booking.com, right? They do it, and most of the travel sites do it. You're surfing, a room, an offer, whatever it is, and suddenly a toast or a message pops on your screen and says, X amount of people are looking at this offer, or this offer is being seen by 200 people, and you're like, oh my God, if I don't click now, maybe I lose it. Does this have a name, Chucho, in Dark Patterns?
Yes, it does. It's called fake scarcity.
Fake scarcity, yeah. I mean, you're being tricked into rushing the decision because you feel like other people are watching. And I have a funny story here. Many years ago, I'll not give you names, but a hotel brand asked me and my team to do that. The owner said, I want you to implement a way of showing this message like, 10 people are looking at this offer randomly. And we would create a fake PHP endpoint for a REST API that would return a random number. And then the front end would call that endpoint, making it look super real. And then we would show a message saying, 10 people are looking at this offer, just to push users into buying early. Amazing.
Well, that also, I mean, this is a combination of a fake scarcity and fake urgency.
Yeah, and double that pattern.
Double trouble. Yes.
No trouble. Oh my God.
So, in any case, this is a little bit more of a fun part in the sense that it's interesting to talk about the dark patterns. It's interesting to see how evil people can be. there's a lot of, I love it. There's a lot of, I'm looking at the list right now, disguise ads, forced action, fake urgency, hard to cancel, hidden costs, hidden subscription, nagging, obstruction, pre-selecting, sneaking, trick wording, visual interface. I mean, there's many dark patterns. And the interesting thing about learning those is that you can also learn good practices based on this. You can also learn what things not to do, how to do things better. And still, this is probably something that you won't be doing as the dark patterns are something that is done deliberately, and usually as a developer don't do it because that's not part of your job. They might ask you to do it depending on what you're working on. But well, it's a little bit of fun.
Yeah, it is. I mean, and my blood now boils through this final section. Anyway, let me go back to my Zen. And
Yes.
So we've talked about patterns, anti-patterns, and dark patterns. Surely the last ones are very fun. Question for the listeners, I guess. Let us know if you've encountered patterns, if you know them by heart, you're a hardcore developer, JavaScript developer. And if you have any dark pattern funny stories, also share with us. It would be so interesting. Chucho, any last words?
No, just as we've mentioned many times, I would really recommend to take a look at these at least once in your lifetime as a developer to read them. You don't have to memorize them, just know that they exist. And it's an interesting read. And if you're a developer and never done this, I really recommend to do it. That's it.
All right. See you in the next Frontend Coffee Break.
See you then, See you, everyone. Bye.